Hello friends, this is the AlphaList podcast. I am your host Toby. The goal of the AlphaList podcast is to empower CTOs with the info and insight they need to make the best decisions for their company. We do this by hosting top thought leaders and picking their brains for insights into technical leadership and tech trends. If you believe in the power of accumulated knowledge to accelerate growth, make sure to subscribe to this podcast. Plus, if you're an experienced CTO, you will love the discussion happening in our Slack space where over 600 CTOs are sharing insights, or visit one of our events. Just go to alphalist.com to apply. Welcome to the AlphaList podcast. I am your host, Toby, and today we have a very exciting episode I'm looking forward to for a while already. Let's call it the AI AllStars episode. Today with me here in the studio, physically, is Jonas Andrulis. Jonas?
Hey, great to be here.
What are you doing?
I'm the founder CEO of Aleph Alpha, ex-Apple AI R&D, serial entrepreneur, that kind of thing.
Okay, and then we have Rasmus Rothe. Rasmus, what are you doing?
Hey, great to be here. I'm Rasmus, co-founder of Merantix. We invest in AI companies, and I have a background in machine learning.
Great. And then we have Johannes Schaback. Last but not least, Johannes, what are you doing?
Well, certainly the least, the smallest, if at all, star in this star round of AI researchers. My name is Johannes. I'm the CTO of SumUp, and I'm super excited to be here.
Then I drop a more, let's say, general question to kind of ignite the whole round. When AGI?
What is AGI to you?
Well, good question. What is it to you?
So I think it's a horrible term, and so I stopped using it. And the reason is that it means so many different things to so many different people. What I quite like is the term transformative AI. This has been used by Open Philanthropy in a report a few years ago, where they say transformative AI is AI that can do about 50% or more of what by then was the total amount of work on the world. It is technology that will shift the global power dynamics, and it's technology that will create new knowledge by itself. And they expect this to happen at around 2030, and I'm fine with that plan.
What would you think are the next steps that we see before 2030 towards transformative AI?
Oh, agents, easy. Right? I mean, that's already happening. We are dense transformers are pretty much scaled out. Many of the improvements basically come through brute force scale in a way that is difficult to deploy. One of the reasons why GPT-5, which exists, is not out there is because it's so difficult to deploy. And Microsoft is losing money with every customer as is. So that's kind of one of the reasons. And the other is that many of the capabilities of LLM are basically created by labeling. And that's the reason why Scale AI, amongst others, they're making billions in revenue, basically by just having tens of thousands, hundreds of thousands of people that are creating, handwriting correct answers. So you already see when you look at that there's kind of an upper limit, right? These machines are mimicking the tasks that humans are labeling or creating. And that is already pretty powerful for a lot of knowledge work that we're currently doing. But I mean, that's about where that stops. And so basically to get more than that, we need to embed these LLMs into larger systems that can do planning, that can do criticizing, that basically can be called agents, like things with like a memory, like a plan, can run multi-step processes. And that's currently what's happening all over the place. We're also working on that, but many teams are currently looking at that.
I was about to say, this is what Aleph Alpha is about, I guess.
Well,
agents?
In a way, like Aleph Alpha was, I left Apple in 2019, and I was inspired by, my last company was doing supervised learning, and supervised learning mostly in the computer vision field. And when you do that, you basically get an overdose of labeling and bounding boxes around pedestrians and that kind of thing. And so this technology is fundamentally limited in the sense that it doesn't matter how much your data you collect or how much compute you throw at it, it will at best recognize 100% of all pedestrians. So I was bored by that. right? There's still legitimate use cases for that, but I was bored. So I was inspired by some of the work I saw within Apple, but also outside of Apple, that was building systems that were self-supervised or based on reinforcement learning. So systems that did not require labeling for the specific task that they then would replicate. And so the hypothesis was that this is an era beyond supervised learning. I had on the laptop I founded this company with, I had like a big sticker on it that said totally unsupervised.
Did you already know which kind of red ocean you're entering there, or potential red ocean?
So I had this feeling that we would underestimate this technology for a while. And this was because I was surrounded by brilliant researchers within Apple. And there were some results, some experiments where these AI systems were showing capabilities that I and all the brilliant people around me were expecting to be impossible. Like, I'll give you an example that by now we're not surprised, is language models can correctly answer logical questions that they have not seen in the training data. And this was a big surprise. But also there was world models. There was an agent that was playing Doom just by experiencing the game and navigating this three-dimensional simulated world. I had no clue that this would bring me within few years to a point in time where I had a 5-figure interest income per day. So it's like a little bit wild how fast that grew.
Rasmus.
Yeah, I mean, like I think like we've seen this in different areas of machine learning already before in computer vision. Like at the beginning, everybody would make fun of the models because they would make all kinds of mistakes, and suddenly it surpasses a certain like threshold in terms of performance where it's just good enough, and we suddenly say as a human, oh wow, it's good at recognizing these images, or it's the text it generates is actually really good. Like before the earlier models, like before ChatGPT, I mean, there was like still like a lot of mistakes every other sentence, and so everybody would say, look, like this is not usable in any commercial application. But suddenly, when it could generate something that made sense and maybe would even wow you, people were like, okay, now it's there. So I think it feels very binary from a user perspective, but from a technological perspective, I mean, there's been a lot of continuous progress. I mean, both on the architecture side, but mostly, as Jonas said, on scaling with more data and more compute, and just seeing, can we make these models even bigger, throw even more data at it, until we are where we are now. But I think now is also, as you said, Jonas, I think there's like a bit of a transition point. I mean, sure, people will try to make these models even bigger, but it becomes also then very expensive, both to train, but also at inference, that it's maybe not necessary anymore. So people are looking now at more approaches where you actually make them smaller again, make them more efficient, because we see that also with some of our companies that use LLMs. Like when they have a lot of usage, you need to start looking at the cost you have, and thus also at your margins, and need to do all kinds of tricks to make sure you don't call the LLM too often, or you restrict the users. And there, obviously, like smaller models again help. So I think that's kind of on the LLM side, and there obviously also people are trying to combine it also with like hard facts, with database, with retrieval augmented generation, where you basically not just have the LLM generate stuff, but you can also connect it with kind of
with real world data.
Real world data, where you also know that whatever comes out there is being used properly, and people are still experimenting with it. Some also now try to throw the data directly into the context window, but I think there's still a lot of things people figure out. And also we see for some of our companies, people are just using LLMs out of the box, and then for some stuff you also still fine tune, because there is actually proprietary data available that not just throwing it in through your context, but on top of that also helps with further fine tuning. So, but that's application specific. So I think there's still a lot to figure out when you take what's there now to all these kind of enterprise application or consumer applications. And I think everybody's still experimenting, and it's not like converged.
That's super interesting. This idea of we're going into an agent-based AI episode, or it's like phase in the world. What does that mean for the data that we need in order to train those agents, right? Because you just said data plays a massive role. Obviously, for LLMs, we had all these massive corpora of text, all the data that's readily available. But training more generally capable agents or building simulation environments in order to create the data in the first place. What does that mean to this whole data industry? Is that the next challenge? So is it less an algorithmic challenge or say research challenge more than and it's more a data creation challenge?
And if that is true, then like wouldn't automatically like someone win per default, like Google, for example, because they have most data, because they scrape most data?
So it's certainly an advantage to have the kind of data that a Google has or an Apple has, certainly that, or others in that space. I would say there's a naive answer and there's a probably maybe less so naive answer. Of course, data is a part of the answer. And so what that means is we can use LLMs, and it's already happening, to plan and to judge future outcomes. And basically, the simplest form of an agent is as an LLM that kind of knows when to use certain tools, what to do in terms of like action, retrieve a document, query an API, use a tool, and then evaluate answers, whether this is the desired answer, whether that's complete. So I think that's already we're already pretty there. We can already have these systems. And what is also very possible is that we will see algorithmics innovations. There is an old, like a few-year-old model that's called Dreamer, the architecture, that what it's doing is this is an agent that has a world model and is using the world model to project the agent itself and the world with all its actions and random events and everything that can happen into the future. And then you get hundreds of thousands of paths and potential future states. And then it's using a value function to evaluate those states and the paths to those states, and basically makes decisions with a utility function. This utility function could be maximum expected value, but could also be a risk-averse utility function. And so we've built these kind of systems. And so we could have systems like that. But an agent that basically is LLM-based and that is just helping me solve a certain task probably does not need a world model that also contains the agent itself, because things like self-preservation and the future of the agent, like the future state the agent is in, is probably less relevant for these kind of tasks.
Okay, but if I was to build an agent, say, in the healthcare system, if I was to build an agent, say, I don't know, for a certain disease or predicting how a certain medication would work out, acquiring that sort of data is so incredibly more difficult, at least the real world data, sampling the real world in that case for say, cancer treatments or whatnot, so that an agent-based model seems exponentially more expensive in terms of data acquisition. Is that true, or can I replicate and manufacture data somehow?
I mean, I think in many cases it helps to have the real world data, especially if there is it's also of a different modality. So if it's not just text, but say some biological data that is in some other structure, not text. I mean, you can obviously always transform data, but there's some particularities when it's about we're, for example, one company that optimizes protein materials that also is a generative model, but for protein data, very different than normal text. So I think there it helps to have that data, to train on that data, to learn from that data, to create new proteins and check basically based on the lab, is it a good or bad protein, and then use it as a feedback to optimize it. So that data, I don't think you could dream of, or you might also not find in that capacity online. But at the same time, if you think about the enterprise world, a lot of what we do is ultimately, writing documents, if it's about legal compliance, finance, marketing. For a lot of these bit more generic tasks, actually the data that is in the web is a good training resource, a good head start, and you can already build a pretty good system based on this rather publicly available data. And so just take one of the LLMs and then build an application around it. So I would say it depends. I think what we've seen from an investor perspective, I think 6 to 8 months ago, everybody was saying, look, these generic foundation models, they will basically can be applied everywhere. Now people see also that for some of these more specific tasks, you have models that are maybe fine-tuned or better embedded or have some, database that is included that basically creates better results, just because there's some very specific information that changes maybe also all the time. Say it's like in the regulation space or so, that can be used by the model. And so for these applications, I think you will have more vertical solutions.
Mm-hmm. Super interesting. Yeah. Should we talk a little bit about Aleph Alpha? I would find that super interesting to understand, what you do. What is your ideal customer?
The size does matter with our ideal customer. So we're currently focusing on biggest enterprises and governments. And the reason is that our advantages over off-the-shelf commodity software, LLMs and generative AI, is that we give more control and more sovereignty to the user. And so basically what we're currently doing is we are helping the transformation of huge enterprises precisely in the areas where it matters most to them. So I'll give you an example. What is already pretty commoditized is customer support chat. I mean, this is not something where a huge corporation would say, like, let's say our investors, like Bosch, for example, they would not say that their ability to answer maybe customer support tickets is necessarily where they have their unique advantage. Although Bosch may be a bad example because they have their service organization. They do quite a bit of those things. But this is already illustrating in a sense that what I'm asking my customers is, what is the part of your knowledge work that is the most meaningful contribution to your company value? Like, what is something where you can basically just become a user of something somebody else is building? And what is the thing that you cannot give to somebody else, where it's your data that is valuable, where you are in a unique position to make a great move and build an empire? And this is the answer to that is different for every enterprise. But basically all enterprise have, and I think they should, have the ambition to not just become a paying customer of tech that somebody in the US or like somewhere around the world is building, but also to build new markets themselves. But where you should focus with that, this is really different for all the players. But we are there basically to provide a foundational technology they can build upon. Because for these transformations, there's a lot more things that matter than who built the best LLM for that. This is also important, of course, right? But there's tons of more. And one great example is we invented a method to make the results from LLMs explainable with positive sources and also with negative sources. So what that does is it's a modification on the attention mechanism that allows you to see what are the observations that have been critical to create a certain factual output. But you can also do the opposite and kind of say, are there observations that would contradict this output? So you can make results auditable, but you can also say, is there, like, if you, let's say you're writing a quarterly report as a big enterprise. So you can say, oh, I'm writing a paragraph and I have a claim inside that paragraph. Is there anything in the interviews my CEO gave to the news? Is there anything that would contradict that claim? And I can easily kind of see this one at a glance. So I think this is quite powerful. And this is really what matters to a lot of our customers, because the progress of LLMs is so fast that once you start this transformation, it'll take you 1 year or 1.5 years until you have this in production with like a DAX 30 company. And by that time, all the LLMs will have changed. Right? So for that decision, it is basically irrelevant whether Llama 3 is now better than Claude 3, is better than GPT 4.5. It matters little. What matters is, what is the strategy? How do you position yourself so that you are in 2 years, in 5 years, you're in a great position?
Interesting. Yeah.
And how do you position yourself to be in a good position in 5 years?
We are maybe the most profitable company in Gen AI. We are currently commercially very successful, but this will not be enough. So the challenge basically is, can we get strong fast enough so that we can survive? right? Because even with 500 million, which is an insane amount of money where I'm coming from, but even with that amount of money, this will not be enough to survive as a player that is a legitimate alternative.
Why? If you're listening to Sam Altman, it's not enough, right? Like it's not.
Well, if you're listening to him, no number will ever be enough.
Okay, but just let me help me get that straight. So you're saying that as a huge enterprise, I'm, worried to obviously have my data been used in, say, a Azure-hosted GPT-4 instance, and I would have never let that happen. And that's where you come in, right? That's where Aleph Alpha comes in and would say, hey, look, we not only give you sort of like a data vault that's super secure, but also we insulate you from a vendor lock-in onto a particular LLM. So that means you're actually not even building your own LLMs internally. Is that what I'm hearing? Or are you, and you're building a massive abstraction facade towards other LLMs? Or are you saying, well, we do build our own foundational model for the language or for the country or for the domain that we're in? Or is it super bespoke? So I'm trying to understand the value that Aleph Alpha adds to an enterprise that that comes with its own data and does not want to use GPT-4, and where you're trying to say, well, we keep your data, but you're at the same time they want to have the access to the capabilities of a GPT-4, say.
Yeah, it's all of those. So we have built our own model. We will launch the kind of next version of that this year. This will basically, from current tests, will be a pretty good choice, especially for non-English. We develop technology to fine-tune and to specialize, but we also basically have an end-to-end stack that adds innovation on top of LLMs, and you can integrate open source LLMs, even closed source LLMs as an API call. Like the method of explainability we developed, of course, our LLMs support those, but also open source LLMs that we integrated into our platform, they support this as well. So you can basically have a Llama 3 result, auditable, in our stack, completely scalable. You can run it on different clusters, like one in the cloud, one on-premise. And we do have customers that tell us if we see any of your components phoning home, you're in deep trouble, right? They want to run this air gap. They want to run it in a secure environment. And it's not just the data. It's basically, and I can absolutely empathize with that. If you think about one of the most important parts of your value chain being exclusively in one cloud that you can never move out of, behind the black box API, like this puts you in a horrible position. I mean, we see big German companies putting tons of money into a multi-cloud strategy because, and one board member kind of phrased it like that in a conversation with me. He said, if one of those clouds know we can't move out, they'll milk us for all we got. Right? So I think that's important. And if you want to take responsibility for future value generation, for the position of your company, you need sovereignty. You need to be able to understand the technology, to run it yourself, to move from one cloud to the other, to move on-prem, to move from NVIDIA to AMD. And I think this is really important. And of course, then we're adding innovation like explainability or guidance where you can have like more transparency and control over model outputs and stuff like that.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I mean, like how we think about the market, I guess we have like two ways to think about the market. So on the one hand, we have a services company where we build customized AI solutions for also governments, big Fortune 500, also SMEs. And that's kind of what Jonas said. That those are usually applications where kind of your horizontal solution that comes from like a big cloud provider is not sufficient because it doesn't. Maybe you need to add proprietary data. There's certain integrations you need to do. There's maybe different models you need to use. So it's something where things don't work out of the box. Plus, they sometimes also, as you said, Jonas, maybe are a bit cautious about things being hosted not in the same country and having less control over it. So I think that's going to be a rising market because ultimately there is a lot of customization. It's a bit like in software development. I mean, there's products out there and there's like a huge market of like software development which is bespoke, and that doesn't make always sense. Sometimes now it makes more sense, and probably in a few years because some more things will be productized. But for this regard, I mean, you're also kind of independent of what kind of model you use. In the end, like we see that also with the latest models like Llama 3 and everything. The models, yes, there's a difference and there's some better than others, but the gap is closing. And I think also the knowledge transfer between these organizations as people hop from one to the other organization will kind of close this gap even more. And so I think you need to just be flexible ultimately and also switch out models. And a lot of the open source push, I think, is also helping for this. So I think that's on the service side. The other thing is I think there will be industry-specific solution where you have enough customers that have exactly the same problem. For example, we started one company in the litigation space, so for lawyers, but specifically for litigation workflows. It's always kind of similar. You send certain letters back and forth. There's certain other data formats and databases you need to look at. It's a very specific workflow. Now, Microsoft will not release a product that will be like, hey, we are the best litigation product in the world, because they could do that for like 1,000 different verticals and they will not have the best product in all of this. So I think that's where exactly then the room is to basically build like a vertical AI company that is solving this problem better than everybody else and maybe even sits somewhere different in the value chain. So for example, not directly sells to law firms, but for example sells to insurance that have huge amounts of claims they need to settle, where you directly say, look, like instead of giving money to the lawyer, give money to us, and then we subcontract the lawyer. And then coming back to Johannes, to your data collection point, then also starting to collect data from, all these like different claims, but also, for example, collecting additional data on like what price to settle for what case. Like this is data that is not available and that you only collect when you run this at scale, which then builds a defensible moat because you are the only one know when to settle for what. And so that's I think what we will see emerge. So in that sense, I think there will be a lot of customization, more enterprise bespoke, and then there will be secondly like very strong like vertical solution. And it's a matter of a specific use case and I guess the time and how good the models are, what way to go at current times.
So that's actually a positive message for like today's B2B SaaS world, right? That like you will survive, guys, because you can apply AI to your use case and it will have a positive effect for your customers still.
But you have to do it. I think it's almost you have to do it. It's a bit like as if you were a company that didn't embrace the internet or computers in general. Like it will just be very hard to compete in the future. So especially if you're a B2B SaaS company, you have a interesting like data record from your customers. You can add additional services where you automate some workflows, like almost like how your customer uses your SaaS solution for certain, I don't know, like an HR solution. Like you can probably automate a couple of those steps. So you can learn from the data you already have from your users and then start to basically build more kind of agents in your solution and upgrade your solution. And then it's a question of, will you be able to do it as a legacy SaaS company? Or will a new entrant come in that basically offers a much better solution? And the interesting part, also coming back to the agent, it also changes the pricing model, actually. So we've seen this, like one thing is to sell software, but if you sell it more like a worker, it's almost in your recruiting budget. You're like, hey, buy this like junior like sales agent. It's like half the price as if you hire somebody, but much quicker, much faster. And then people start think very differently about budget, which is a great opportunity for some of these companies.
Like value-based pricing.
Exactly. Yeah. And that's talent is a fantastic segue into something that I always wondered and admired about Aleph Alpha. It's amazing what you've accomplished. I have to say that. It's fantastic what you've built. It's really, really impressive, I have to say. Not only from a purely German, but also from a European standpoint, it's really amazing. I have to say this is super, super, super impressive. And one thing that I always wonder how you do that in the beginning, how do you attract the best talent in order to build a sales force, an enterprise sales with these massive long sales cycles, right? How do you do these deep tech integrations, bespoke, right? You don't only need to understand, the LLM piece, the AI piece, but you also have to understand your customer that are big ships on their own. So how do you get the best talent on the planet in Heidelberg? So this would be super interesting.
So I'm pitching Heidelberg to our international candidates as the German Tuscany, and it kind of works. So since and this is really where our last funding round helped us a lot. Like at the very beginning, we started as maybe one of the first Gen AI companies, where we built these models when there was not a lot out there. So we were able to vacuum up a bunch of those researchers that wanted to work on these, but for whatever reason, maybe they couldn't get into OpenAI, or they didn't want to move out of Europe or something like that. We were able to hire a bunch of those. And then as the kind of funding picked up, as more and more companies entering that space, I was in a situation where I felt we have to now position ourselves somewhat differently. I felt that if we cannot build a meaningful differentiator, then we will just be left behind. And this was also the reason why it took me about a year to raise the last round. And probably I aged a decade in that time. And we had tons of offers on the table from institutional investors, from strategic investors, from Asia, from the US, from Europe. And really what we went with is quite a unique structure in that we found investors that were partners first and investors second. And we partnered with companies like the Schwartz Group that is currently investing about 2 billion into this AI center in Heilbronn. So it's really, there's a lot more strategic alignment there than basically just having them as customers. We are closely working with their internal experts to help them, of course, master this transformation, but also they are helping us understanding their markets, understanding their verticals. And with that funding, we were able now to hire phenomenal people, like hire people out of Google, out of Palantir in like leading positions and bring them to Heidelberg. We also do have a Berlin office, but headquarters is still Heidelberg, and we have all the senior leadership team there. So I think this was amazing, and I'm now incredibly happy to be around this amazing group of people. But yeah, this is far from the end. Like we there's still far where we have to go.
Where do you see yourself personally, but also the company in, say, 10 years?
So personally, I mean, there's always, I try to be, not to be too full of myself. I'm in a lucky position that I had my personal part of, or my personal time of hubris during the time at Apple. Like when I joined Apple, I had this kind of feeling that I am the king of the world, right? Nobody I'm invincible, right? And then in Apple, corporate politics brought me down a few notches, which was probably for the better. And now I'm thinking about, like, on a regular basis, I have to reinvent my own job. And companies changing all the time. I'm always critically asking myself, am I the right CEO for the next 18 months? And there might as well come a time where the answer would be no. And this is fine. For me, this is fine. Let's talk when I actually make that call. But for now, I think when I think about it, it's fine. And what I can also say is that the next 5 years cannot, on a personal level, cannot be like the last 5 years. This is not sustainable.
I can imagine. Rasmus, does the same apply to you?
I don't know what else to do. I guess I'm just really excited by like bringing more smart systems into the real world. That's always has excited me, and yeah, I mean, I've been doing this now for a couple of years, and I want to continue this. So I think there's the good thing about our setup is that both with a services company, but I guess also as we invest and incubate new companies in AI, both incubate, but now also start to invest externally. There's always like new areas of applications coming that I've not thought about before. So I think it's super interesting to go after these, different job profiles that will change, or do something in life sciences, or do something that has maybe like a positive climate impact. So also working on things like, I wouldn't say we're like an impact fund, but I think we're generally looking at every venture case we're investing in. Is it like, does it make the world like even slightly better, like even if it's just a small bit? And so I think that's super motivating. And I think on the talent side, I think we're also super lucky to work with very talented leaders in all our companies. And I think one big advantage has been the AI campus in Berlin, where ultimately creates a community. Because for a lot of the questions I think we discussed today, like nobody knows. Like the technology is changing super fast. There's regulation, there's like investor sentiment, there's moves of the big cloud providers. This is all like impacting like strategy of the business, and we all have a hunch of where things are going, but like things can also move very quickly. And suddenly, I mean, I remember I was with Björn Ommer, who's stable diffusion, discussed like how long it will take until we can generate videos, and that was like in December. Then Sora came out and generated pretty good videos, and he was like, probably takes a bit longer. So even the people that are probably some of the best in the field, are always surprised about progress. And so I think we're trying to create this community on the campus where you at least are in the room with other smart people, and so can kind of a bit extrapolate what's coming next, what is the next exciting trend. And I think that helps to attract talent. And that has been ultimately, I think, also one of the big advantages of the big tech companies, that you are surrounded by enough other smart people to make sure you stay on top of what's going on.
And others pay for your learnings, huh?
Yeah, and I mean, like everybody, I guess, puts like a puzzle piece in, like there's lots of interesting learnings. Like some are obviously super technical, but some are also like more on the business side, on the fundraising side, on the hiring side. It's like, it's not, I would say, like one specific thing that is most useful. It's a combination, and everybody brings something to the table.
Yeah, and I would love to know how you set up your company cultures, because in the case of Aleph Alpha, right, it needs to be a super strong sales mindset, enterprise mindset, but also a super strong R&D mindset.
And also engineering product.
Engineering product. So how do you bring both worlds together? How do you set up this feedback cycle of, the researchers being super excited about the customers, and vice versa? How do you build that culture in I don't know, 1 year's time?
Hire the right leadership.
Okay.
So we have now as a co-chief research officer, Yasser, who built the AWS team in Tübingen and built Bosch AI research. So has a tremendous amount of experience building phenomenal research teams in corporations with like a customer value focus. So he is doing a lot there. And of course, when we're interviewing researchers, I always challenge them on what if their goal is to bring value in the world, or if their goal is to have a high citation count, or like in Europe's paper. And if your goal is just to have a cool, like be on conferences and have a high citation count, then you're probably not the best fit for what we are doing. But I mean, hiring is one answer, and then we're building our whole organization so that we're somewhat decoupling these teams, so that it almost never happens that a researcher gets significantly pulled into a customer's problem. So we have the research is allowed to think about foundational problems with like different time horizons. And then there's sometimes researchers that are saying, we would love to talk to customers, we would love to see what they're doing, and then we'll make it possible. But of course, we now have brought in people that have tons of experience with enterprise sales. And you can imagine those are people that have a very different mindset and culture and way of going about things. And this has caused some friction. And when we build up this sales organization, there was fear in our tech team. They basically said, oh, now we are becoming a sales-driven organization, right? Now everything that will happen is basically just what sales can sell to any customer, right? They'll sell whatever a customer wants, and then we have to be the team that delivers. And I told them that this is far from where we're taking this. Like, we need to sell, of course, but this is an innovation-driven company. Like, we cannot survive by basically just having a great sales team. And so basically it took a little bit of explaining and now kind of learning and experiencing this new culture. But certainly it is a challenge. And it is also what some smart people told me in the very beginning would not work with the setup of Aleph Alpha. They said, you can build a kick-ass AI R&D organization, but you cannot also build a great product organization and a great enterprise sales organization basically as one team.
Yeah, I mean, like, I think we are also constantly learning how to reinvent the organizations and set them up differently. What's interesting, one of our companies, Brink, they started in the ESG reporting space, tried to automatize that, and then basically when the LLMs came, they realized, okay, we can actually do much more for the customers using these LLMs to basically do much more elaborate document processing for those when it's about analyzing supply chain data and basically all the reporting. And it's not just like a small reporting piece they can automate. And they suddenly, like last year, kind of pivoted the whole product. And that actually innovation came from the technical team, because they said, look, with these new LLMs, we can actually do 10 times more than what we can do with kind of our more rigid traditional models. And so there actually, it was really good to have the tech team close enough to the customers that they would see what other pain points there are, and then they basically just ship features in like 2-3 weeks to the customers, and suddenly got so much pull that suddenly became the direction of the company. And so I think the point is like we actually try, like, because the technology is moving so fast, and obviously the tech team is closer to that. We want to make sure that they also translate that to what the customers needs, because the customer often also doesn't know what they want because they don't know what the technology can do. So having a technical person kind of helping with that discovery actually has helped us to move quite fast. And then the other part is being even more rigorous about just throwing stuff away you've done before, and not trying to invent everything in-house, but basically trying to plug as much as possible together. And also, when your stack changes, it changes, like, can change all the time. And I think that's also the right mentality you have with people, which sometimes when it's a more R&D focused organization is challenging, because people are obviously in love with what they're building and try to optimize it until the last.
I mean, that's an interesting challenge, right? Because if you're on one end of the spectrum, then you're basically an Accenture or a consultancy, because this is the business they're in. Like, they're assembling state-of-the-art technology, best of breed, and then they're building something, and then they're kind of handing it over, and then off they are. But you also have companies that are building like own IP,
yeah.
Right? So it's always like a balance in a sense. I'm absolutely with you, right? You can never kind of fall too much in love with what you've built in the past, what may not be the way to go for the future. Or you can also like this fallacy, not invented here fallacy, right? Where you say the best thing, of course, is the one we can build ourselves, right? This is, of course, a big danger. But on the other side of the spectrum, you're pivoting, or you're transitioning into a services company, which you may also not want. So I think that's an interesting balance.
I think ultimately, for the product companies, I think you need to understand what the technology can do, what the pain points of the problem is. Now, does it make in the product roadmap? I'm not sure, but I think running these experiments has proven very powerful. We had a similar thing with our Deltia, like computer vision and manufacturing application. They suddenly also started to have just an LLM interface for their customers and tried it out, and suddenly customers loved it. And they just, somebody just hacked that together in the weekend. And I think trying to try out these new things and figuring out how to integrate in their product is good for obviously AI first companies, but also for, to your question earlier, Tobias, to like SaaS companies, to see how people can quickly hack something together that adds additional value to customers.
At SumUp, that is called a Loonshot at SumUp. It's called a Loonshot. It's basically a very small team, 1, 2, 3 people max, that do something entirely crazy that is totally phase separated even from the rest of the company. So totally insulated, totally on their own. They can do whatever they want. Nobody asks for money or timelines or whatnot.
That's great.
And they can do whatever they want. But you can only sustain maybe 2 or 3 of them, because if you were to do too many, then obviously that would actually add to the cost too much. So that's why striking this balance of having sort of like a budget for crazy ideas. How much do you do that in your companies? How do you have sort of like a budget, or where does innovation like these singularity almost ideas that then take on like a wildfire?
I mean, like, this is what got Steve Jobs fired from Apple, right? The fact that he basically did something like that with the first Macintosh team, where he selected people into a separate building. They hissed a pirate flag over the building. They really did this. And they were able to do something wild and unthinkable. But of course, this caused the rest of the organization to be mad about it.
The ivory tower.
Yeah. and I mean, like, why can they do all the fun stuff? They get all the honor and all the budget and all that. And I'm like in this boring delivery organization.
Right.
So I think that's also a challenge here. And we have... we are lucky in a sense that we have this research team, which is a true research team in the academic sense. Like, we're publishing. We had 2 NeurIPS papers last NeurIPS. So we are really out to solve things that nobody knows if they will succeed, and nobody knows how to do them really. And this is a luxury that most startups cannot afford, having a team like that. And so I think we're in a somewhat fortunate position here, but still, even within our company, there is always this trap you could fall into where people are basically saying, "Oh yeah, the most sexy place to be is research." And basically everything else is basically just the boring stuff that comes afterwards. And I don't get tired telling people that productizing that is really difficult and is as difficult. And then selling something to world's best enterprises and closing like an 8-figure deal is really difficult. Those are different skills, but they're all essential to what we're doing. And it's not just that the most sexy and amazing and cool things are only happening in research, but certainly we structure the organization so that we can make that possible.
Johannes,
Yeah,
how do you apply that to your daily business?
What do you mean, AI or
Yeah,
innovation
well,
management?
Do you have an ivory tower that everyone wants to be in, and how does it look like? Are you in the ivory tower yourself, or
I'm pretty much in an ivory tower, I think. So SumUp is a portfolio of various products. So we do point of sale, banking, payments, consumer, and so within each of those verticals, we have our own little hubs of innovation. But SumUp has this cultural element of a Loonshot also engraved in the culture. And we even have a special budget for it that are crazy ideas. And obviously those ideas aren't so crazy far off that we would now go into the energy sector or healthcare sector. So it's always something where there is still a value for small merchants as they were to build up their business. But it's something that would be almost science fiction. As to like a social network or a different payment method and something unthinkable, but often over time and sometimes faster than you may imagine, it catches up. That's how we do it. But always very limited because we also feel that the greatest source of inspiration are actually our customers. And I think earlier to your point, Rasmus, right? I think if you ingrain in your culture the value of driving innovation from a customer's needs perspective, that can also yield fantastic results and come with best of both worlds. Of there is a demand on the customer side, but it's also exciting from a technological side. That's obviously where the place you want to be.
We created something we call innovation board. Mm-hmm. And that is where leadership and smart people, like senior people from the organization sit. And everyone in the organization can pitch an idea to the innovation board. And the innovation board is then able to supercharge your idea and put significant resources of the company, of all orgs. So it's really like changing the course of the company, not just within your team, but basically saying, okay, we have to realign our resource allocation because we want to make this a reality. So this is really how we want to enable these ideas beyond just building a kind of research prototype or building something just in product, or right. And I think that's really, really exciting, but it's also, of course, risky.
How do you, by the way, look at your customers, right? They are in a transformative process. It must be scary, but also exciting at the same time for them. When you come in, helping them transform their company, what are the types of emotions and how do you help them make that transition? Because it seems you're probably far more than just a technology provider. You're probably also sort of like an agile coach 3.0 in helping them how to use AI properly, I guess.
In a way, our product feels like the Industrial Revolution itself. And so I am in a amazing position to now be in like really deep conversations with CEOs of world's best enterprises. And that is, to me, also absolutely amazing because I'm really like surprised and amazed by the quality of thought that's already there.
Interesting. So what you see, the majority of CEOs actually embrace AI and are fearful of losing out or missing out on AI? Or would you rather say they're excited about the opportunity? Like is there more a German angst or are there more...
So there's probably a little bit of a selection bias in the sense that the ones that are talking to me for a few hours are probably not the ones that are hiding under the desk. Yeah. And so I have amazing conversations. And then during these conversations, I'm asking them questions and I'm saying like, what do you think is the empire that does not exist yet, that you are in a unique position to build with generative AI in the next 5 years. And then we're thinking
pretty good sales pitch.
And then we're thinking about this, and then they're saying, because with this new technology, a new piece of land has been discovered, and nobody owns this yet. And this is value that can be generated. And tech companies are coming at this, and they're saying, we are going to own all of that. And when you look at the development of price-earnings ratios on the market kind of seems to agree. Like the price-earnings ratio for tech gone up, but for all other sectors, it was basically flat. So the market thinks that a lot of the value that's being created will go to tech. But Microsoft alone cannot revolutionize manufacturing. Right? They have no clue about that. For them, it's all just data. But in Germany, we have phenomenal manufacturing companies that have this knowledge, and they have teams, and then they can do things that nobody else in the world can do. And so you always have to combine the vertical knowledge, the vertical data, the vertical distribution with the technology. And basically what I'm trying to inspire people to think about is, what are the unique moves I can do? Like, what am I in a unique position to do? Where is knowledge work for my future position in 5 years, in 10 years? What's the most important position to be in? And I think those are incredibly interesting conversations. And I came out of conversations with CEOs really inspired by the ideas they put on the table in these conversations.
Guys, we slowly have to come to the end. It was really great.
I have a last question.
I also have a last question, but maybe you go with your last question first, because before I go with the last question.
As our audience is very technical, right? I think it would be super interesting to hear from both of you. What would you recommend, similar to the conversation that you just described with CEOs of, DAX companies? What do you recommend CTOs who may be in a company that either totally embraces AI and is super excited on the one end of the extreme, and what would you recommend to those CTOs that may not be finding themselves in a place that is super excited about?
Wait, you just stole my last question, Johannes.
See, great minds think alike.
I think, first of all, it's about training. So you need to have your whole organization try to understand AI to a basic level. So, there's a lot of courses out there. So really, even if it's your marketing team or it's your, sales team or customer support, give everybody a basic training for AI, because they're ultimately your internal customers.
What would you teach? A bit more concrete.
I think the general understanding of these AI models, what kind of data,
prompt engineering,
how does prompt engineering work? How do they maybe basic internally work? What are kind of some of the data privacy things you need to be careful about? What are some cool applications that maybe others have built in your similar domain? So I think that's one thing. Second thing is embrace people to just try things out. There's some companies who say, look, we want to stay away, but the majority, I think, should just embrace their people to use maybe LLMs in some of their workflows, or try out some AI tools, maybe even bring it up to your internal budget department, be like, hey, I want to try out this AI tool, can I use it? So that bottom up, people start using it and are not scared of it anymore. And then the other part is, I think you need probably one person in the company that is kind of ahead of AI, or really is at the forefront, a champion to have an overview of also what's going on outside and kind of translating that. It could be the CTO, but you might not have the time for this. So then maybe getting one person who's really dedicated and has an overview of where's some AI already used, what's happening outside in the market, what should we build in house, where there's maybe solutions outside, to have this kind of more strategic overview, and either hire that or ultimately promote somebody internally if there's somebody talented.
Do you agree, Jonas?
I kind of agree. I would add to that if your strategy is just I was on a stage with somebody, an AI leader, a German AI leader, and they said that they're currently giving everybody in the organization a ChatGPT training. And I think that's great. But if your strategy is basically just to training your people how to use things that others have built, then you shouldn't be surprised that no future value creation will end up on your desk. So what we are doing is we have a levels of maturity. Level 1 is prevent an irreversible shift. So make sure that you're not losing out, that you're not losing essential data to somebody else, that you're not losing value chains so that you cannot easily get them back. It could also be like collecting your data set, changing your way about going with data. Second thing is the business transformation. So quick wins, generate value. Like Bosch already has a positive return on investment with our tech. So that's important, right? Create value fast. A lot of this is about efficiency. And then the really sexy thing is the third, which is position your team so that the next industrial revolution, that the next transformative idea will come from your team or can come from your team. And I think this requires a little bit of setup. How can you enable your internal experts so that they can come up with transformative ideas? And I think this also requires a lot of like organizational building and bringing the people into the right kind of context and all that, right? Because you don't always want to be trying to catch up to a departing train. You want to, for kind of one or two things, you want to be the leader globally for this transformation.
So in that sense, it's like bottom up and top down. I think like it's bottom up, empowering everybody and like, starting to use it and fostering innovation in like some units where you would maybe never thought that people would use some of these new technologies. But then also I think like creating, like, as you said with your Bosch example, like one lighthouse case in your organization that is more pushed top down, maybe based on this information, where you are also putting really resource behind, where you say, look, like this is not just some fancy AI demo, but there's a real ROI. We used it here, we invested, we built something, there's a positive ROI, it increases sales, it increases efficiency, we can put a number on it, like really commercially, and then also have that as a case study to then again inspire more people like bottom up. And I think what we see a lot is, especially large organizations, there's a lot of hype around this, and so people try to do what looks fancy is visual, but not maybe necessarily what maybe creates crazy efficiency or can increase your sales. So sometimes it's in more boring departments, so to say, where there's the biggest gains.
Thanks a lot, guys. Great discussions. Really enjoyed it and hope to see you soon.
Thanks
for having us.
Thanks.
Thank you.
Thank you for listening to the AlphaList podcast. If you liked this episode, share it with friends. I'm sure they love it too. Make sure to subscribe so you can hear deep insights into technical leadership and technology trends as they become available. Also, please tell us if there is a topic you would like to hear more about or a technical leader whose brain you would like us to pick. AlphaList is all about helping CTOs getting access to the insights they need to make the best decisions for their company. Please send us suggestions to cto@alphalist.com. Send me a message on LinkedIn or Twitter. After all, the more knowledge we bring to CTOs, the more growth we see in tech. Or, as we say on AlphaList, accumulated knowledge to accelerate growth. See you in the next episode.